Oh, so what we're going to talk about today is the overview, modular based, that we changed to the R2T4 changes, the exemptions, distance education, program integrity, and institution eligibility, to name just a few. So when did these things happen? The rulemaking was published in April 2nd, 2020. The comment period ended on right around Cinco de Mayo, May 4th, 2020. The final rules were published September 2nd, 2020, which they all went into effect July 1st. But the Department of Education allowed us to early implement some of these things if we chose to. But we all knew we had so many other things going on at that time with the pandemic and with CARES Act, the HERF grants, so many different things. So a lot of institutions did not choose to early implement. So we need to understand, what is a modular based program? Everybody thinks about it as modular based. I don't have that during any of my classes. I might have a spring, I have a fall, and I have a winter, but I have a summer ones. When all classes do not expand the whole period or that whole semester or term. Guess what? That is the definition of modular based. When all classes in that term, quarter, semester do not expand the whole period the Title 4A was based on, for standard terms and non-standard academic. This excludes the description-based programs and your non-term programs. So any courses that is shorter than the payment period or period of enrollment, that is considered modular based. So watch out for that. You may have students that are in the spring and fall, they're not modular based. And now they come into that summer term and they have an A, B, and a C, and we're demonstrate that right here, that a lot of institutions and colleges have throughout. It goes based on that semester. You might have little blocks in between that make up the semester. You want to watch out for that because that would be considered modular based. You might have one class that expands the whole semester, but then 3 other little classes in the middle that do not expand. So that would be considered modular based. So taking the picture, looking at the terms that we have in programs that we have and identifying those. Are modular based or not modular based? What term is modular based and which terms are not? Or are any of them not modular based? The effective date that we talked about is July 1st. You could early implement, but it's for all students that has ceased attendance or graduated on the July 1st date if we didn't early implement. The biggest one, a lot of us that have that summer term that has a little sessions or mods or J terms or mini sessions, whatever we want to, however we want to sell it, however we want to say it, they're considered modular based. And even in the middle, we would have to be following the new regulations. It's based on the time of the withdrawal or the cease, not the payment period. So that means it's based on the LDA, not the date to determine the DOD, that the school determined that the student is no longer there. It's even the calendar's midpoint is associated with unofficial withdrawals or the midpoint date when the determination of the rules applies to credit hours and clock hour programs. So there's been multiple changes. I like to talk about the old regulations. What were the old regulations for modular based? They said, if a student is going to come back in that payment period and we have written confirmation, we don't have to do anything. Now, go to July 1st. They made some different changes. They added that one. They kept it the same. Now we need to assess multiple things. The first one, did the student graduate early? The second one, did they successfully complete 49% of the payment period? The third one, did they complete coursework equal to or greater than required of half time during that payment period to meet the exclusion. So we're gonna clock. So what happens? The first one we talked about was graduation. A student is not a withdrawal if the student completed all the coursework or graduated for his or her program before the day or hours in the payment period that was scheduled to complete. However, aid has to be recalculated based on these rules. It applies to all programs with or without mods, including your clock hour programs. For instance, clock hours that early graduate. If a clock hour student graduates without successfully completing all the established hours in that program, the student is not considered a withdrawal. The school must re-prorate the amount of Title IV aid. Only pay the students for the hours that they successfully completed. Reproration just applies to only the clock hour programs when a student completes the hours early, not the weeks. Remember that, very important. It's when the student completes the hours early, not the weeks. It does not apply to credit hour programs. Additional information has been coming. The department has been saying that always. I've been talking to them lately a lot. And they've been saying, oh, it's going to come out in volume 5 of the handbook. Before we know it, it'll be Halloween. Before we know that, it'll be Thanksgiving. And hopefully volume 5 will be out and there'll be more guidance for us all. But we will see. So here's a quick example of this non-term clock hour early graduation payment period. We have 300 hours, 11 weeks. We have 150 in 4 weeks. The student successfully completes the program, meets all the requirements, a cease attendance. It's not considered a withdrawal. However, if that program, we will now, if we paid it on that 150 to 300, we're going to have to readjust the Pell and readjust the Title IV loans down to what they actually did. And if we see this as a trend for all of our students, we may have to adjust the hours in this total program. But if it's just the one-offs here and there, there's no requirement to adjust that program. But periodically be looking to see if all of our students are completing the hours earlier than anticipated, because maybe we accelerated it, whatever. Pay attention to these programs because the department really is. It's on their radar. So one of the first exemptions is the 49%. Don't get this confused with the 60% on the return on Title IV calculation. This, in a modular-based program, a student is not considered a withdrawal if they successfully complete the Title IV coursework of one that includes 49% or more numbers of the accountable days, or they combined mods and it's over 49% when they successfully complete. The word successfully complete, what does that mean? It means earns a passing grade. And some institutions might have a stricter policy that a D is not considered passing. That means they would not be passing for one of those classes. So make sure we understand our policies and our procedures about what we consider passing. So what are accountable days? It includes all days in the month during the period. What do we exclude? We exclude breaks of 5 or more consecutive days, very similar to the return on Title IV. However, there's one other break we have to exclude: the days between mods. Quick example, our mod ends on a Friday, the next mod ends on a Monday. We have a 2-day break right there. We need to be excluding that the weekend. Watch out for that. Or sometimes, a lot of times, it ends on a Thursday. We have a 3-day break that we need to be excluding. So watch out. And can't emphasize this enough. It's not the same calculation of days in the period for the R2T4 denominator. And a big one. You cannot round up this calculation. If we have 48.5, 48.5 means 48.5. It doesn't mean 49. So be very clear on that. We do not round on these. So pay attention to that rounding policy. Let's get into an example for us. Counting the countable days. We have 106 days in a semester, 50 days in the first session, 3-day break, and then 53 days in the second. Student is registered for 3 days, 3 courses in the first session, and 3 courses in the second. The student successfully completes the first session, the first course, and the student drops during the 3-day break. What is countable day percentage? Can anybody in the audience unmic themselves and provide me the answer, please?
106.
All right, 106. Let's look. Let's see if we're correct. So remember what I talked about earlier, because there was that 3-day break. So we have 50 in the first session and 53 in the second. We have to exclude that little break, needs to be excluded. So we have 103. So now, because the student successfully completed that first session, so it's 50 days over 103, which equals 48.5. Now my question to you, does the student meet the exemption? Yes or no? Who wants to be the brave soul to answer this one for us?
No.
No.
Thank you, guys. We're right on. We're nailing it. That is correct. Because why? We cannot round up. 48.5 means 48.5. It does not mean 49. We all understand when we were back in math, learning those math, we would round up in this case. But the Department of Education says no rounding. Make sure we're paying attention to our rounding on that situation. The next one, and I think these are out of order sometimes in my mind. When I think about it, it's very easy to identify halftime over the 49% calculation. Would people agree with that? When you look at your transcript and you see that the student successfully completed 6 credits, and in that semester full time would be 12, so halftime would be 6. It's really quickly to say, oh, they passed a 6-credit course. They met the exemption. This is only for your standard and your non-standard programs, modular based. It would not be considered a withdrawal if the student successfully completed that coursework. So remember, because some of our institutions and colleges have what's considered clock to credit programs. Now that definition may not be your standard full-time, it's 12. It could be less than that. So now it's equal to or greater than the coursework registered for the school's definition of a half-time for the payment period. So really watch out for that. And remember, these courses have to be counting towards the degree that they are applying for. It can't be for something else. It can't be in a class they wanted to audit or try out at 6 credits. They would not meet the exemption because it does not apply towards that program or that certificate. So make sure we're paying attention to that when we're looking at it. We could overlook that very, very easily. So pay attention when we're doing that. So let's get into a quick example. We have our summer term, goes from May 17th to July 30th. Mod 1 is 6 credits, just 24 days. And that crazy 3-day break happens again. Mod number 2 is 24 days. Mod number 3, there is no break. It's 6 credits, 24 days. The student was registered for 6 credits in each of the 3 mods. Mod 1 with a passing grade in all 6 credits, and dropped Mod 2 during the first week of Mod 2. The student is not in any full-time course. So in this situation, let's see, would they meet the exemption? Do I have a brave person to answer yes or no? So brave. Not even a little, maybe yes, no. Remember, halftime at this institution is 12 credits, and they successfully completed 6 in the first. What would happen? Yes, they would meet the exemption. Thank you. So we provide on here a decision tree. I'm going to show you what we would do on this decision tree. How would we go through this process? Talking into our minds, what should we be doing? Hey, after beginning attendance in at least one mod, did the student stop attending or fail to begin attendance in subsequent mods? That would be yes. Then what do? We need to ask ourselves another question. When the student stopped attending or failed to begin attending scheduled course, was the student currently attending any other course in the payment period or period of enrollment? And like we said earlier, they were not in a full class for the full term. So we would be no. So did the student graduate early? No, it's the first term for this program. So we know they did not graduate early. The second step we would ask, the next step we would ask, not the second, the next step we would ask ourselves. Did the student successfully complete the coursework in one mod or mods that are 49%? Like I said earlier, it's easier to switch these and ask yourself the next one. Did the student successfully complete the halftime requirement, which in that example we provided earlier was 6? They successfully completed. They earned a passing grade at the institution. And now our ask our question, what do we do next? Yes, the student is not a withdrawal. It may be necessary for us to recalculate the Pell Grant and any campus-based aid if that's part of your policy. So make sure we understand that policy and make sure that we're monitoring that. So this decision tree that we have here, it helps answer part of that new process, and it's getting us in the right mindset to say, what steps do I need to be thinking about when I'm doing the return on Title IV in a modular-based term? Because a lot of us don't have these throughout the whole year. They're not all of them. They're not all terms and all semesters. Maybe only be a few. So pay attention. Use this chart as a walkthrough until you better understand, or till you master it. And like I like to say, mastering something is very hard to do. I still haven't mastered martial arts, and I've been in martial arts for over 30 some years, more than that, almost 40. Next year I'll be 40. Started when I was 3. So, and I could not say I mastered it. It's really hard to master something, but be great at something is a different story. So we can be great at return on Title IV. And this is a great tool to utilize for the new modular base. So, the fun part, and the part that I talked about, that roller coaster ride. The Department of Education has been very sneaky lately. They talk about the denominator calculation. What is it? If we met none of those exemptions, we still have to do another calculation. We're all talking to ourselves, what? Another one. That adds more to our plate. Scheduled days to attend. It goes by what Title IV aid, using the amount of aid eligible for the program that was based on that payment period. It's a significant change than was before. For instance, if you only have Pell for that whole term that the student was eligible for, and there wasn't loan eligible, it would be just that one term, that one mod. But however, the department keeps on changing their regulations. And they're like I talked about, that sneaky turn back around that we didn't see on the blueprint of that roller coaster. I'm gonna put it in the program integrity of, oh, we didn't like this way we worded it. So on September 3rd. The Department of Education made some different guidance. They made some new changes. So they said it's all aid when you first started scheduling for that term. If they were Pell and loan eligible, it doesn't matter if they reach 6 credits or not, at least half-time status. You have to use all mods that were determined for that period. So if there was 3, no matter what, and you pay Title IV aid on all 3, that is the denominator. In my personal opinion, I don't really see the point of the denominator calculator. It doesn't really benefit. It makes it more complex for institutions to make errors. But that's just my personal opinion. So when we do this right here, we only exclude breaks of scheduled 5 or more days. Breaks that occur after the student is no longer enrolled during the period. We exclude breaks when combining with a mod the student is not scheduled to attend, becomes 5 or more days. We do not exclude breaks that are less than 5 days, such as between the mods. That's very important. At 49%, we do exclude, but here we do not.
That throws everything off. I don't know. That's a good question because.
All right. So if I think somebody's on their mic, if they're asking a question, I'd be more than happy to address it. But if we're talking to somebody else, can we please pause our mics? Thank you so much. Schedule, there's 2 opportunities. There's 2 different ways that we can look at this. We can have no R2T freeze date. We use the enrollment status that eventually uses to determine the amount of Title IV aid for that period. Adding or dropping any classes throughout the period could cause the number of days to change. Or we take it with the freeze date. Very similar as a snapshot of that point in time of what they did. All right. We're going to talk about no freeze date. The school must determine the number of days that was scheduled to complete in the period by looking at the coursework used to determine the amount of aid that they were going to be eligible for that period. You must include all days in the mods. Attended at least 1 day in the mod, or did not attend at least 1 day in the mod, but the mod was eventually included. Say this right, eventually included when determining the aid amount for the period. The type of aid the student receives may, I can say that again, may affect the days used in the R2T4 calculation. So let's dive into an example. The first example I have here, going back to that 106-day semester, 50 days, session 1, 50 days in session 2. On the first day of the payment period, the student registers for a 3-credit course in session 1 and a 3-second session course in session 2. The student was awarded half-time disbursement of Pell and no other Title IV. The student drops on the 25th day in session number 1. So we already know in our mind, when we go back to that decision tree, they did not meet any of the exemptions. They half-time, they graduate early, or 49%. So now we need to determine the denominator. How many days are used in the denominator calculator right here? Do I have anybody out there that's willing to share, go out on a limb and give me an answer for us? Or should I just pick somebody?
106.
106. Very close. Remember how I emphasized the word Pell, because we talked about it earlier. It was only based on Pell. The Department of Education says because Pell has what's called a recalculation, because in a modular-based program, you base Pell on all the semesters, the mods inside that payment period. So you would, because you're required to adjust it down in the calculation, down to what we have was, in that example, we go back one, make sure I don't say it wrong. Previous slide. The student was half-time. So if I paid a full-time Pell disbursement, I'm adjusting down before I do the calculation to a half-time Pell. Now, because of that situation, we have that little buy. I'm only going to use 53 days calculation, which was the first session over 25 days, which is 47.2. And we all know that does not equal is greater than 60%. And when I mean 60%, I don't mean 60 on the nose. I mean 60.01. Has to be greater than 60. Just remember that in the return on Title IV. Let's get into another example. Same situation here. 106 and 53 and 50 in the second session. On the first day of the payment period, student is registered for a 3-credit course in session 1 and a 3-credit course in session 2. The student is awarded half-time disbursement of Pell and direct loans. The student completes session 1 and drops prior to session 2. How many days are used in the denominator? The calculation. So do I have anybody else that's willing to give a shot on this one?
106.
Yeah, all right, let's see what we got. Excellent. And we remember very carefully, because why is it 106? Because the student received not just Pell, they received direct loans. And now, because when we determine that direct loan, it's over all the periods, all the mods or J terms or the S terms or the mini mods, however we want to spell it, say it. And now Pell, you said earlier, why was it different? Because remember, the school must perform a Pell recalculation and reduce the amount to less than half-time, because that's all they were there for. And your Pell is based on what? The actual time they attended the institution. However, since the student received direct loan, the full 106 days was used. So whoever provided that answer, thank you. You were right on base, and that's what we want. Excellent. Now, like I talked about, oops, I went too far. Didn't I? All right, just before I turn it over to Kathy real quick, I want you guys to remember, I talked about it earlier, very, very important. The department has given us that extra loop that my oldest would want to hold on to, the program integrity. They made changes on 8/20, 9/3, and guess what? 10/6 about some of the things I just talked about, the 49%, the denominator calculator, all these things. So they're not putting it out and letting us know by electronic announcements or dear colleague letters. They're just saying it's out here. You should be checking this on a regular basis. So I encourage you guys to be looking at that, monitoring it, and to ensure. But one thing I do have for you, a good thing, the department said to us, if they made the efforts that was in the previous guidance from the department, that they don't have to make change. But when that day comes out that the program integrity was updated on the 3 days I mentioned, now you're required to do those things. So make the good faith effort, periodically be checking that out. So before I turn it over to Kathy, we have a few minutes for some questions on those things. Who has my first question?
I have a question. If you have a student in a term-based program, they also are required to have written confirmation of future attendance. Is that correct?
In a term-based program, is it modular based or not modular based in this situation?
Modular based.
If it is modular based, we're going to be talking about that. Yes, you would, if you get the written confirmation, there is no requirement to do that, but they have to be able to come back in the sessions. As you saw in all my examples that I provided, the written confirmation would not be eligible. The only way that they could do that if they drop on that first one and say, I'm going to come back in the second mod. but normally they drop at the end. It's really hard to come back in the second when there's only 2 mods, the payment period. But yes, your answer is yes. Any other questions? Let's see here. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to talk about some fun stuff about written confirmations and some of the other new changes that we talked about.
Thank you. And I also put that program integrity link in the chat if anybody, that Greg talked about, if anybody wants to, go there and bookmark it for yourself so you can keep an eye on it. All right, my mind's blown. I'm sure everyone else's is too. I feel like I've been on a roller coaster since, early June when we first started talking about all these changes that came down on July 1st. And as Betty was mentioning, written confirmation of future attendance is part of what has changed. So for a non-term program, a student is not considered to have withdrawn if the school obtains written confirmation from the student at the time of the withdrawal. And in that written confirmation, they have to indicate when they will resume attendance, and that date can be no later than 60 calendar days after the student ceased attendance. For subscription-based programs, that written confirmation has to come again at the time that the student withdrew, and it has to indicate when they'll resume, but that date has to occur within the same period and can be no longer than 60 calendar days after the student ceased attendance. Next slide. For standard and non-standard term programs offered in modules, I think this is what Betty was referring to, excluding subscription-based programs, the student is considered a withdrawal if, and you have to get that written confirmation, if the school obtains written confirmation from the student at the time of the withdrawal, indicating that they will attend a module that begins later in that same period, and that module begins no later than 45 calendar days after the end of the module the student ceased attending. And this is an old requirement with a new time frame. So I hope that answers your question. If not, reach out to us and we'll try to get you more guidance on that. Let me get through to my notes here. So academic engagement, there are some changes here. In current regulations, there's no definition of academic engagement. But the R2T4 regulation 34 CFR 668.22 set requirements for activities that might be considered academic attendance or attendance at an academically related activity. And these are used as a basis for establishing a student's withdrawal date and pertain only to this regulation. So there are various applications of the term academic engagement throughout the Title IV regulations. The return of Title IV funds regulations refer to this definition when describing academic attendance or academically related activities. And the updated definition of a clock hour refers to academic engagement for distance education purposes. And the updated definition of an academic year in 34 CFR 668.3 refers to academic engagement for distance education purposes. Most of that regulation relating to the requirements for academic attendance and attendance at academic related activities was incorporated into the definition of academic engagement. There's important concepts that you'll want to remember for the updated definition of distance education, and they're applicable to R2T4 and other applications within those regulations. They specify that academic engagement includes interactive tutorials and webinars, and they clarify that merely logging into a class or an online tutorial is not academic engagement. Our next slide. So the definition of clock hours is 50 to 60 minutes in a 60-minute period of attendance in a synchronous or asynchronous class, lecture, or recitation. where there's an opportunity for direct interaction between the instructor and students, or asynchronous learning activity involving academic engagement in which the student interacts with technology that can monitor and document the amount of time the student participates in the activity. So the new definition clarifies that the programs offered in distance education may be measured in clock hours. They require that institutions are capable of monitoring the students' participation. So an example of an acceptable interaction could be like a webcam in a synchronous setting or other technology to monitor the academic engagement. Keep in mind that the school is responsible for demonstrating that the students are either present in a virtual class, lecture, recitation, that they have an opportunity for interaction, or that they are academically engaged throughout the period counted as attending for the clock hours. Examples of something that wouldn't be acceptable is awarding clock hours based on estimates of work completed, like an average time that it takes to complete an assignment, or just logging into a course. That does not count as attending or all or even part of a clock hour. Then we talk about the credit hour definition. The amount of work that the student completes is defined by the institution, approved by the institution's accrediting agency or state approval agency that's consistent with commonly accepted practices. So 1 hour of classroom or direct faculty instruction and a minimum of 2 hours of out-of-class student work each week. At least an equivalent amount of work as required in the first paragraph of the definition for other academic activities as established by the institution, excluding laboratory work, internships, things like that. You may take into account a variety of different delivery methods and measure the students' work, academic calendars, disciplines, and degree levels.
I'm gonna hold you on for 1 second before we get too far out of there. We have
Go
one
ahead.
question that just came in, Kathy. It says, if a written confirmation is provided a few days after the withdrawal date, is that enough to satisfy the requirements to obtain written confirmation? Would that be considered at the time of withdrawal?
Betty, she always asks the hard questions.
Betty, challenging questions,
Challenging questions.
but
So,
What I'm thinking about is, we get the withdrawal form in the financial aid office, so we contact the student and ask for their written confirmation. So it's not technically at the time of withdrawal.
yes,
So
that
that-
is acceptable.
yes, that is very acceptable because you're trying to engage that student to come back and see if there's any way. It's a great process to have, to engage that student to maybe see if they can help. If they're in a situation that they're not able to come back, but they can come back during that payment period. Because we all know what happens if they drop from the institution. Most likely the odds of them coming back are very slim. So this is a great way, and that's a good practice, Betty. Thanks for sharing.
Okay,
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
thank
a few days is close enough, but you wouldn't want to let it get too far out.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I think we're going on to distance education. Next slide. So the updated definition for distance education refers to the instructor or instructors rather than simply the instructor. And I know that's very confusing. It defines an instructor as an individual responsible for delivering course content and who meets the qualifications for instruction established by the institution's accrediting agency. It eliminates references to various types of media described under the current definition, for example, DVD, CD-ROMs, and replaces those references with the phrase of just other media. I want to remind you that if you have started offering distance education and because of the COVID waivers, and you decide that you're going to continue to offer distance education after the end of the COVID-19 waiver period, you must have your accrediting agency approval to do so, and then report that offering to the Department of Education. If you do not, you may lose your Title IV eligibility for any programs using distance education that have not already been approved. So even prior to the end of the COVID-19 waiver period, which I don't think that we know what that date is yet, we're encouraging you to obtain your accrediting agency approval and report any new offering to the department. You can do that by logging into your e-app, navigate to section G, question 31, and respond yes to the question, are any of your programs offered in whole or part by correspondence or distance education? And I hope that's a helpful hint to you all. So another important concept for the updated definition of distance education is that instructors must engage in at least 2 forms of substantive interaction, meeting the regulatory requirements during each course or competency. And substantive interaction would be defined under distance education as engaging students in teaching, learning, and assessment consistent with the content under discussion and including 2 of the following interactions on this slide. The regulations do not prescribe a specific frequency or combination of each type of interaction, except that they must be predictable and scheduled. Institutions must also ensure regular interaction between a student and an instructor or instructors. So to recap, when evaluating an institution's use of distance education, the department will verify a few things, and they are that the institution's online instruction is delivered through an appropriate form of media, the instructors with whom the students regularly and substantively interact meet the requirements of the institution's accreditor for instruction in the subject matter, that instructors engage in at least 2 forms of substantive interaction, meeting the regulatory requirements for the course or competency, that the institution has established scheduled and predictable opportunities for substantive interaction between students and instructors, and creates expectations for instructors to monitor each student's engagement and substantively engage with students on a basis of that monitoring. And instructors are responsive to students' requests for instructional support. Are there any questions on any of that academic engagement, instructors, distance education requirements, before we jump into one more change? I don't see anything coming through the chat, so go ahead, Greg.
I want to give one thing. I'm going to show, can everybody see my screen about the program integrity question and answer thing?
Yes.
Okay, so with what Kathy provided earlier in the chat, this is what's going up. Let me go back up to the top. Let me just move this over. So if you look at this in the program integrity, it talks about the different regulations, the required ticket attendance, enrollment. But right here, if you go to scheduled days in the payment period, if you can see it right here, I'm highlighting it for us. Look at that, 3 different changes that they made. And it talks about the wording in there. They archived the one from 8/20. They archived the one from 9/3, and they're making more changes. So I encourage again to make sure we're periodically paying attention to this. It gives really good examples, good questions, and then they answer those back out here. I know it's not a good way to communicate to our institutions and making sure that we're fully in compliance. But now that we're aware of where they're doing it, let's just stay on top of it and make sure that we're in compliance. So hopefully you guys got that link. It's really easy to go and periodically just look at it to see if the department is trying to give us a curveball. Like I always say to my teammates, my coach, my students for baseball, if a curveball comes, that means all it means is the opposite field. Same way in financial aid. If that curveball comes, we know how to handle it. We know what to do with the ball. We know what to do with the regulations. And here's a good step. Let me get back to the presentation real quick, Kathy, my slow skills of.
Yeah, I got 2 minutes to get this last one out.
Oh,
And we'll get you out on time, I promise. Their program participation agreement, if you're clock hours, you want to make sure that you're considering that 150%. verify what your state requirement is. I think Greg has an example.
Yes, very quick example, Tennessee. And I know we're all in Pennsylvania. I'm just giving you a state example that we recently experienced. The state all of a sudden had a massage therapy program that was 700 hours. They brought it down to 500 hours. And the institution wasn't aware of that. So what the department says, only 150% of that. They were paying aid on 862 hours. But the regulation said that they should have brought it down to 750. When we made it aware to them, they're like, oh, what do we do? They had to go back and adjust all of those students and return some of that aid. So periodically be looking at that if the state changes any of those regulations to make sure that we're in compliance with our clock hour programs. And it's not more than that 150. Make sure that we're paying attention to it. To end today's session, keep that in mind. The Department of Education, the states, they throw these little wrinkles out there. They don't let us know, but they want us to communicate back to them. But that's okay. We know, we have the blueprints. We know what we should be doing because we have great process and procedures in place. We know where to look. We know where to find the answers. We have great team people around us to ask questions to find those answers. Stay up on the regulations, find those little tweaks that they're making sure that we're going back and we're identifying on our policies and procedures and we're making the appropriate changes. I have time for 2 minutes for questions. Is there any questions? I'll take the first. Let's see here. Right, do we have it? Let's see here. Okay, we do the same. Does oh, here we go. Thank you, Jim. Does the withdrawal exemption apply to students who pass credits in Mod 1 and then drop in Mod 2, but graduate from a program other than the declared program of study? In this case, remember, what Title IV aid is based on is a program that they are getting Title IV aid, what they were actually trying to apply for. Not because they go from an associate's, now all of a sudden they get a certificate. Yes and no, so watch out for that. If they meet those exemption and all the courses periodically are, transfer into that associates, then maybe yes. Then the answer is, I hate to say this, it depends. Like the Department of Education would say to us. But if they all do transfer in, then you would be eligible for the exemption. But if they don't, not even one, then you would not be. So let's see. It looks like there's no other questions. So I encourage you guys to look at your procedures, your policies on the return of Title IV, and make sure that you guys are counting all these things we talked about today. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out to us or reach out to your fellow coworkers or your fellow peers to see what they're doing to help you guide through all these new regulations. Thank you for your time today.
Great. Thank you to Greg and Kathy for going over these important topics. For those of you in the meeting today, please do your survey. It's on the PASFA website, and we appreciate you guys for helping us out. Thank you.
Have a great day.